Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, regional greenhouse gas initiative, school sports, but first, the challenges facing Pennsylvania's public universities. As they say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we have a variety of important topics to take up on Pennsylvania Newsmakers this week. And we're going to start with Jamie Martin. She's the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. Jamie, welcome to the program.
Hello, Terry. Thanks for having me back. I really appreciate being here this morning.
My pleasure. I'll tell you something. The COVID-19, and it has a huge effect on schools all across the United States and obviously in Pennsylvania. And it's having an effect on higher education, on colleges and universities. What are the challenge? How has COVID-19 affected the 14 publicly owned universities in the state? Now, I want to point out that you're a professor at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And Jimmy Stewart's not there anymore, right?
Jimmy Stewart's not there, and neither is Harvey. He's no longer there either.
Okay. Well, now get to the topic. Go ahead. COVID-19.
All right. COVID-19. So you might remember I was on your show earlier, and I talked about a faculty survey where the faculty had indicated they were concerned about COVID spikes at universities where there were students coming back, and we saw that happen. And so just in terms of the number of cases, at Bloomsburg University, at Kutztown University, at IUP, there's certainly been spikes, about 360 at Bloom, 200 plus at Kutztown, and over 150 at IUP thus far. So just between those three universities where they brought back more students than they had at others, we're certainly seeing spikes. And that's led to a lot of concern among faculty and staff about exposure to this virus. And I keep saying, I'm just hopeful that the number of students who have contracted this have good outcomes. That's really a concern for all the faculty, the health of our students.
Yeah, well, many students, as you know, young folks are asymptomatic and they can pass it along to other students and pass it along, obviously, to adults. And that has to be of some concern. I know that in most universities, they're really dealing quite well with doing the spatial distancing aspect of it in the classrooms. It's what happens in the social side of things for students and off-campus events for the most part. Am I on target here?
Yeah, I think you are on target. We're hearing about, again, though, a lot of these plans expected students to change their behavior, and we know from decades what students do. And so they were doing what college students always do, even in the middle of a pandemic. And so sure, there were off-campus events, parties, and the like. And so certainly events were going to have spread among the participants or the attendants at those places. We still have concerns about the availability of tests, the length of time it would take to get results from those tests, and then contact tracing.
Great. Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about something that's very important. That's the enrollment changes that have taken place in the public universities. So, what's that like?
Well, I mean, surprisingly, this year, the last that I heard, and we're still waiting for final numbers, the enrollments weren't off as much as we thought they could be. I think at the state system level, they were maybe down less than 3% was the estimate. And at some universities, they actually had increases in enrollments. And so the predictions that we might lose a lot of students who would take a year off didn't seem to come to fruition for the state system universities. So that was good news for us.
Yeah.
And we'll wait for those final numbers to come out.
Well, the budget situation has really affected the students and the faculty, and of course the compensation. So what's the student-faculty ratio situation, and why is that important?
And so what's happened recently is the chancellor had announced some time ago the need for universities to come up with sustainability plans and to meet those and to reach that in a 5-year period. In April, he accelerated that process to 2 years. And part of what universities had to do was to meet the student-faculty ratios from 2010-11. And you might remember that was when our enrollments were at a peak of probably close to 120,000 students. And now the enrollments are down, and so the expectation to hit those ratios in a 2-year period of time during the middle of a pandemic is a tough thing to do. It's a heavy lift.
Sure.
And what I've said repeatedly is I was in the classroom during that time, and it was not a panacea. It was not a wonderful time in the classroom for the students or the faculty. When class sizes were greatly increased, I had a class with 125 freshmen. And I guess the one thing I keep coming back to is I don't know why our students aren't deserving of having class sizes that are smaller on the nature of what Penn State and Pitt and Temple students get to enjoy. I don't know. I think our students are as deserving as any, even if they are in some cases first-generation college students.
Okay,
they deserve to have the same kind of experience.
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming on the program. You'll come back and keep us updated on what's going on in colleges and universities. It's how do I say it? It's a happening. They're in considerable change right now. But again, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much, Terry.
All right, coming up. Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We're going to talk about that and how important that is to the state of Pennsylvania after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, we have Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania joining me. And boy, we have a couple of very important topics to take up. Let's start with Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I'll tell you, that's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is.
But this is an important consideration for Pennsylvanians. Am I right about that?
Yes, it is. It's a big issue in Harrisburg now, getting a lot of discussion.
So
called
what is
RGGI.
it?
That's how they shorten the name.
Well, there you could say that. All right, what's it about and why is it important?
It's an initiative that the governor's undertaken. He started a rulemaking proceeding through the Department of Environmental Protection to join a regional group of states in the Northeast that have a cap and trade system for greenhouse gases. It's a climate change policy, basically. And it's being opposed by some groups, by gas drillers, I think, among others. The General Assembly has jumped into the fray and is saying that the governor needs legislative authorization to move forward, which he contests. So legislation.
So something really new, right? The governor and the legislature at odds.
Yes. Another point of contention.
Yeah, right. Good point.
But the legislature's passed a bill now, House Bill 2025, I believe, that's on the governor's desk that says that the governor needs legislative authorization to join RGGI. Of course, he's expected to veto that. It looks like they're probably not going to have the votes to override that veto.
So what exactly does this initiative do?
It establishes a cap on greenhouse gas emissions in the region of all the states that are part of RGGI. And then it sells allowances to allow emissions up to the cap. And you sell those allowances so it raises money which can be used for conservation or any number of other topics, mostly related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
And so this would be just the start if this gets through, I would think.
Yes, this is something that will go on for many years. The cap is reduced every year, the idea being to reduce emissions necessary to fight climate change.
Right.
But some of the opposition is because it would raise electricity prices, which it probably would. There are some folks who I think there's skepticism, frankly, about climate change, which is probably at least part of what's behind
part of it, sure.
Part of what's behind that.
All right, let's turn to something else, and it's very important to all of us, and that has to do with energy use and prices. So what's the situation with energy use right now?
Well, energy use overall is down a bit, and that's largely because of the downturn in manufacturing related to the pandemic. However, but while business use is down, residential use is up because people, of course, are spending more time at home. And we also had quite a hot summer. So those air conditioning bills got pretty high. I know mine did at home, running the air conditioning all the time.
Yeah, working at home does that.
Yes.
With more and more people working remotely. That's the remotely is the word of the day, I think.
It is, yes, and you don't want that house getting up to 75 or towards 80 when you're sitting there in your office. Well,
let's run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about what all of us as consumers can do to reduce energy bills and get, help assistance if they need it. And we'll take that up after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, my guest this segment is Terry Fitzpatrick. He's the president of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. And as I promoted this, we're going to talk about energy. How can you reduce your energy bill, and how can you get help? Take it.
Well, I think with a couple things, Terry. I want to say with the pandemic, with the impact it's had on people, losing their jobs, losing income. The first thing I want to say is to folks, if you're having a problem, please contact your utility and try to get some help, because we do have a moratorium on terminations now, so utilities will not turn anybody's service off. However, those bills continue to accumulate. Eventually, the customer's going to have to deal with that. It's much better to deal with it sooner rather than later. The first thing I would say is, the first thing you can do is reduce your usage. So look for energy-saving tips. You can find them on your utilities website or on the PUC's website. You could also possibly save money if you shop for electricity or natural gas. But I do want to make the point, if you're going to do that, you can save some money if you're careful and if you're diligent. Mm-hmm. But if you're not, you may end up actually losing money. In fact, more people end up paying more if they go with a competitive provider of electricity because they don't pay enough attention to the details.
Right. What about the terminating your service? Yes. There has been a moratorium. Is that moratorium still there?
It is still in place, yes.
So explain that. What's that mean?
Well, back in March, when the pandemic first hit, the PUC put out an order that said that you couldn't turn anybody's service off in order to provide some assurance to the public. There's been some controversy over that. The PUC internally, the commissioners have disagreed about the terms for removing it. I think they recognize that it's having the bad effect. It's actually accelerating the accumulation of bad debt expense because, unfortunately, too many people, without an immediate consequence from not paying their bills, they choose to put their money towards something else. That's why I started this off by encouraging people not to let that happen, because there will come a time when they have to pay that or they have to make arrangements, and it's better to deal with it up front.
Yeah. And there's another important topic, and that's buying 100% renewable energy, something that consumers can do given, I guess, their environmental preferences.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. What's that about?
Well, in the competitive market, one of the options, there's a lot of different options that you have out there, depending what you're shopping for. You can get short-term deals, long-term deals. Another thing you can get is renewable electricity. Some of it's local, some of it's not. And I think a lot of folks have done that. Of course, that doesn't mean that every electron that you use comes from renewables, because renewables aren't operating when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing.
Yeah.
So you're really taking power from the grid, but you are committing, helping those types of projects to get up and running.
All right, one more question, and it's
Sure.
a tough one. What's the future for energy? Are we going to eventually get rid of fossil fuels and go to renewables, and with climate change becoming a huge issue?
Well, the uncertainty surrounding that, Terry, is about is about the same as the uncertainty surrounding our political system and how elections are going to go. But no, I would say this though. In order to make a grid run, you need all sorts of resources. You need a variety. You can't operate it with our current technology on things that just run part of the time. So you are going to need those base load plants, whether it's natural gas or nuclear, some other type of fuel. So you're going to need a mix of resources.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on, and you'll come back, as I like to tell our guests, and keep us updated. All right, here we go. High school sports, they're pretty important. Who should control what happens? We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
Well, there's been a big debate in the Capitol in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, over guess what? School sports, particularly high school sports. Who should control many aspects of that, of sports in the schools? Joining me to talk about it is Jan Murphy. She's the Capitol Bureau Chief of PennLive and the Patriot News. Jan, as always, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
All right, there's been a furious debate in Harrisburg over who should have the final say about school sports. I want you to talk about what that final say means. And the dispute is between the governor on the one hand, the legislature on the other hand, and of course, what goes on in the 500 school districts in this state with regard to sports. Take it.
Yeah, this has been, it's something that a lot of people have been able to relate to because we're talking about high school sports, and that's so important to parents to be able to see their kids play, and to the community, it gives them a rallying point. But to back up and lay the groundwork here, the legislature passed legislation that would give local school officials, public and non-public schools, the exclusive authority to decide whether to hold sports and how many people could be in attendance at them. And the governor vetoed that bill. Well, yesterday we had the House come in and a special session, very called within a 24 or 12-hour notice, and they attempted to override the governor's veto, and it fell 5 votes short. And so what that means now is that legislation still is not law. There is this federal judge that weighed in on the limits on social gatherings that the governor has imposed, and he has ruled that along with other COVID-19 restrictions that the governor has put in place as unconstitutional. The governor requested a stay on that ruling, but the judge denied that. However, yesterday I got an email from the School Boards Association, who is of the mind that federal court ruling does not apply to high school sports and attending high school sports. And so they're still reviewing it. So it's just very confusing. Meanwhile, we have schools out there that really don't know what to do. I mean, the reason these things are put in place is because there's this concern about large gatherings of people and contracting the coronavirus.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's parents who say, this is my kid's last year playing football or field hockey, and I want to be able to see them play. And so there's, it's just really, it's enough right now.
Well,
and I don't know.
I thought the governor made the point all along that the schools already have that authority. You don't need to put it into law. But, it seems confusing.
Well, it is confusing. The governor is right that right now schools can decide whether or not to hold sports, but it's his limit. He does have limits. He did put limits down on how many people could attend. And when he talks about that, he's also in the attendance figure, it's including the team, the kids that are playing or participating in an activity. So that, we've heard legislators say for girls volleyball teams that some of the players have to stand in the hallway because they already exceed the 25-person limit for an indoor event.
Well, I'll tell you, when there's been this big dispute between the governor and the Republicans in the legislature over the governor's pandemic limitations. Do I got that? Limitations, and Republicans disagree with that. It looks like they would prefer to have the state open more quickly for all sorts of business and other activities than the governor. So where does that all stand now?
Terry, it really is all just in the state of flux. I mean, you broke up a little bit there, but I guess I would like to say that the one thing that the House did yesterday is said that they would reserve the right to revisit the overriding the veto vote, and so we might see that again. There's this, like you said, there's this big disconnect between the General Assembly and the governor, and I even had some Democrats say that they feel that the governor is not engaging with them, and so it will be interesting to see kind of what, how they can get this resolved. But it's just growing frustration over the handling of the coronavirus and, what needs to happen. And
all right, before I let you go, one more question. There's a big debate about election reform. We've got the mail-in ballots and differences, again, between the governor and the legislature, not on every issue involving election reform, but where does that stand, and what are the important issues related to election reform?
Well, the courts, we have all three branches of government here involved right now in our election laws. And so right now, the governor has scored a win on allowing the drop boxes and I guess they call it late counting of ballots that arrive on election day. They can be counted, as long as they receive, they can be counted on election day. They can be counted later. Now there's this thing about what they call naked ballots or secrecy ballots that people have to make sure that they put their ballot in the proper way.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming in and giving us this timely update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.